Hi, good afternoon. You're all very welcome to our webinar today on the business case for biodiversity. Just to note that this webinar will be recorded and we will share slides and the recording afterwards. And at any stage, if you have any questions during the webinar, please pop them into the chat and hopefully we'll be able to answer them at the end. So my name is Kathleen O'Regan. I'm a Senior Executive in the Sustainability and Renewable Energy Department of Enterprise Ireland. And I'm joined today by Lucy Gaffney, who's Executive Director of the Business for Biodiversity Ireland. And Lucy will be joining us shortly. So we are hosting today's webinar in collaboration with the Business for Biodiversity Ireland. And I suppose a key step in developing your corporate or your business sustainability strategy is to prioritise sustainability issues for your business under the environmental, the social and the governance pillars. And we've shown this in previous webinars on how to develop your sustainability strategy and action plan and how to prioritise sustainability issues. At a very high level, under the environmental pillar of sustainability, there are 5 key areas. So we would see energy and emissions, water, pollution of air, water and soil, resource use and circular economy, waste management, and finally biodiversity. Now, there is a lot of narrative and focus to date, I suppose, on energy and emissions, and other sustainability issues, including biodiversity, often gets overlooked. So today's webinar is focusing on biodiversity and nature positive and what terms such as biodiversity, natural capital, nature positive, what those terms mean. We will hear insights into the why, the what, and how of taking biodiversity action. So why should companies take action? What actions should or can they take? And how can companies take action? And we'll see some industry examples of nature and biodiversity commitments and targets. So I'd like to extend a very warm welcome to Lucy Gaffney. So Lucy is the Executive Director of the Business for Biodiversity Ireland platform, which is a non-for-profit that supports Irish businesses in understanding their impacts and their dependencies on nature. The organisation also helps companies develop credible nature strategies. Lucy has over 15 years' experience in launching and leading successful ventures in the fields of microbiology, biotechnology, and sustainability. She currently sits on the advisory board for the European Business and Biodiversity Platform, the Impact Board for the EU Horizon funded Go Nature Positive initiative, the Steering Committee for Peatlands Finance Ireland, and is also participating in the working group for the Nature Finance Roadmap for Ireland. So Lucy, I'd just like to hand over to you and welcome you here today, and thanks so much for joining us. Thank you.
Thanks, Kathleen. I'm just going to share my screen now with you. And let me know if you can see that okay.
Yep.
Great. Super. Thanks so much for that. And really grateful to Enterprise Ireland for affording us this opportunity to address Enterprise Ireland businesses and anyone else who's in the audience on biodiversity and what's happening around that conversation on biodiversity and how it's changing and evolving now with the new reporting landscape that's emerging from the EU. So let's get started. So my name is Lucy Gaffney. I'm the Executive Director of Business for Biodiversity Ireland. This project, which I'll tell you about now, was one of the objectives of the third National Biodiversity Action Plan. So this has been seed funded by the government departments, so the Department of Housing, Local Government and Heritage, and the Department of Agriculture, Food and the Marine for the last 3 years. So we've been building this over the last 3 years, and even in that time, the landscape has changed enormously with things like CSRD, and that's the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive, the Global Biodiversity Framework, the nature restoration. So much stuff has happened in nature over the last few years. It's really ramping up through the agenda now in terms of corporate and business focus areas. So the platform itself was sort of launched in 2021. The program was led by Natural Capital Ireland, and we've had support from the National Biodiversity Data Centre and Business in the Community Ireland as well. And so the companies that you can see in that panel on the right-hand side are organisations we've been working with for almost the last 2 years to really understand how to use these new frameworks and methods that are coming on stream, like the Task Force for Nature-Related Financial Disclosures and the Science-Based Targets, and also aligning with CSRD and all of the other information that's we're now being bombarded with for nature assessment. we really wanted to understand, what time is required, what kind of expertise is required, what are the outputs like, and trying to answer those questions by working directly with businesses. So we haven't answered all those questions yet, but we're in the process and we're working through it. And so that was part of our pilot program. And helped us to develop a roadmap to nature positive, which forms part of the value proposition for becoming a member of the Business for Biodiversity Ireland platform. So I want to talk briefly about the aims of the platform. So as I mentioned, it was one of the objectives of our third National Biodiversity Action Plan. Our fourth national plan was released back in January, and we own 6 objectives within that plan. The key aim really of the platform is about encouragement and empowerment of Irish businesses to have a look at their impacts on the natural world and their dependencies on the natural world, but also looking at risks and opportunities that might arise as a result of engaging with the nature agenda. Ultimately, we are aiming to support the delivery of and the implementation of the 4th National Biodiversity Action Plan, and that's aligned to the global goal for nature, which I'll refer to again throughout the presentation, which is basically seeing no net loss of nature by 2030 from a 2020 baseline, net gain from 2030, and a full recovery by 2050. Now, we don't quite know how to define full recovery yet, but there's a lot of people working and researching in that area in terms of defining what that looks like. So our overall mission is empowerment. So empowering every business here in Ireland to incorporate nature into decision-making at every level. That is what our mission of this organization is. I wanted to just jump in with some definitions for you, and some of you might be familiar with these definitions, but this is how nature and biodiversity are referred to in things like CSRD or the TNFD or SBTN. So I know I'm alphabet souping the situation, but you're probably familiar, if you're involved in sustainability, you will be familiar with many of those. So when we speak about nature, we are talking about the living and the non-living realms. So the non-living components being things like water, soil, and air. And we understand nature through these 4 key realms: ocean, land, freshwater, and atmosphere. And you'll see those 4 realms referenced throughout TNFD, throughout the Science Based Targets Initiative for Nature. And we need to understand that we, as a society, as a species that exists within the biosphere, we impact and we depend on each of these 4 natural realms of ocean, land, freshwater, and atmosphere. Now, when we talk about biodiversity specifically, we're talking about the variety of life on Earth, which we know, but it's not just about the different species that exist within habitats or within ecosystems. It's about the different types of habitats that exist within our biosphere. It's about those different species that exist within those habitats, but also about the genetic differences between the individuals within a community. So biodiversity is multi-layered. It's not just about different types of plants and animals. It's multi-layered, different types of habitats, and the genetic differences that exist within populations. Biodiversity is a key indicator of the health and intactness of an ecosystem. So that's how we measure how healthy and robust an ecosystem is. We look at the biodiversity. Introducing the term natural capital, this definition comes from the Capitals Coalition. It is the stock of renewable and non-renewable resources that combine to yield a flow of benefits to people. So it's essentially nature's contribution to people, to the human species. That's what we get. So it stocks in the form of fibers, food, materials. It flows in terms of the services that we get from nature, like water regulation, air regulation. And ultimately, we all benefit. We as a species, we've evolved within this biosphere. We've evolved alongside it, alongside all of these systems on which we thoroughly depend on. And it's really important that we're able to acknowledge that. The term nature positive, I want to introduce that to you as well. It's a global societal goal that is defined using the terms halting and reversing nature loss by 2030 based on this 2020 baseline, and then trying to achieve full recovery by 2050. So a more simplified version of that is ensuring that we have more nature in the world in 2030, which is only 5 years away, than we had 5 years ago in 2020, and a continued trajectory of recovery after that. If you think about how our economic systems are built right now, so we introduced the term natural capital. Our economic system is currently designed to extract and harvest and harness all of the elements of our natural capital assets. So a natural capital asset is like a forest or a freshwater ecosystem or a marine ecosystem. And we are using and utilizing all of the stocks and services that come out of those natural capital assets, those ecosystems. We're harnessing and harvesting those through our primary sectors of energy, mining, extractives, agriculture. And we're transforming all those things through our secondary sectors of production and manufacturing into the stuff that we eat, we wear, that we drink, that we drive, all of the bits and pieces that form part of our daily lives. So then they are distributed through our retail sectors. And ultimately, we are transforming all of those natural capital assets through our current economic system into financial capital. And the biggest problem we have here is that there's no way of redirecting all of that financial capital that's sitting in the banks, value created through that value chain that sits as our current economic system. There is no way that we have currently to mobilize those financial flows back into the protection and stewardship and restoration of our natural capital so that we may continue. So it's a very linear system. And what we're trying to do is help businesses understand that being nature positive means that you are reducing the negative impacts of your business, the actions and activities within your business, within your value chain, and you're redirecting resources and finance towards and investing back into nature, that it can continue to deliver upon stocks and services in which we depend, ecosystem services. I want to introduce Planetary Boundaries. If you haven't seen this before, I would highly recommend watching Breaking Boundaries on Netflix. It's an incredible documentary. If you haven't seen it already, it's well worth a watch. Back in 2009, we identified 7 planetary boundaries. And at the time, we had assessed that we had crossed over 3 of them. Currently, the most recent analysis of that happened last year. We sort of added in 2 additional boundaries that we discovered. We, as if I did part of it, the Stockholm Resilience Centre. We now have identified that we've crossed over 6 of those planetary boundaries. And ultimately, we are approaching tipping points with these planetary boundaries, after which the system changes and it becomes very unpredictable and the changes become irreversible, and we're trying to avoid hitting those tipping points. And the idea behind the nature positive approach is not about having a business that does absolutely no damage or has 0 impact. That's not realistic. It's really about creating a business that is resilient in the face of climate and biodiversity related shocks, that operates within those planetary limits. That is the key to having a resilient business. And that is what this is all about. So many of you on this call will have heard of net zero, of course, and I wanted to just bring net zero and nature positive together. I think we've done an incredibly good job of divorcing climate change and biodiversity loss, but really they are 2 sides of the same coin and they are circling the drain together. The big message here is that net zero is a complete fantasy if we don't invest in our natural capital, if we don't reinvest in nature. There is no net zero without nature positive. I mean, the current mantra that we hear in the corporate world right now is doing less harm, treading lightly across the world, reducing your impact. But the nature positive movement takes it further. What if, rather than just treading lightly, we go beyond just limiting the damage that we're doing to the biosphere? What if our business activities also help to enhance ecosystems and replenish our natural capital? That's what a nature positive direction looks like. When we pull net zero and nature positive together, you may not realize, but there is equivalence to the nature agenda that we have in the net zero. So in terms of globally, we had the global objective of limiting global warming to 1.5 degrees as agreed in the Paris Climate Accord in 2015. On the nature side, the Global Biodiversity Framework and the Global Goal for Nature was agreed in Montreal in 2022. So we have an equivalent global target as we do for climate and carbon. At the business level, you often hear businesses talking about net zero objectives, are climate neutral, and we're not really allowed to use climate neutral anymore because it's sort of banned by the EU, which is fair enough because it's difficult to define. But net zero by 2050 is a typical business level commitment. Some people are being more ambitious than that, and it's absolutely possible to do this before 2050. Nature positive is a little bit I guess, more vague. It's more about this basket of local targets. It's very linked towards the assessment of your impact on nature, your dependency on nature, risks and opportunities. And I guess the corporate level commitment, again, is a little bit more vague, and that's because of the complexity of biodiversity. And I think because of the immaturity in terms of metrics and stuff that we have. Now, all of that is changing and growing rapidly, but it seems to be a reason to hold people back because we don't have a silver bullet metric. But a typical business level commitment is a contribution to a nature positive economy. And I think it's important to recognize that you can't be nature positive in and of yourself as an organization. You're contributing to a nature positive future, a nature positive economic future. And that's why it needs multiple commitments across sectors, across different types of businesses. It's contributing to a system, and you're just a part of that system. So it's important to note that it's a journey. It's not necessarily a destination. It's a way of working, and it's a mindset, and it's part of your core values within your organization. And you'd be delighted to know we only consider scopes 1 and 3 in biodiversity and nature, because obviously scope 2 is very much energy related. So we're looking at your direct operations and your value chain. Now, why should we care about doing things for nature? Why is this important to our businesses? Nature matters for business. It is the backbone of the Irish economy. It is the backbone of the global economy. We all depend on nature. Every business depends on nature. We, as a species, as a society, we cannot survive, let alone thrive, without the essential functions that the natural world provides us with. So we need to think about these 4 things: how we impact on nature, how our organization impacts nature, how we're depending on nature through those value chains. What risks does nature and biodiversity loss pose to our business operation and our business resilience? And what opportunities can we realize by engaging in the nature agenda? So the next slide is about the key drivers of biodiversity loss. And I suppose the message here is that businesses, people, society, public bodies, everybody has some kind of an impact on nature. And these five drivers of biodiversity loss, these were declared by IPBES, which is the Intergovernmental Science Policy Platform on Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services. So it's kind of like the biodiversity equivalent of the IPCC, which is probably the climate change version, which you'd probably be more familiar with. In 2019, they declared that there's 5 key drivers of biodiversity loss, and businesses, societies, public bodies, government, we all pressurize these drivers of biodiversity loss. So climate change, as mentioned, climate change and biodiversity loss are inextricably linked. They're circling the drain together. Climate change makes biodiversity loss worse. Biodiversity loss compounds climate change. You'll see an example of this when we see extreme temperature weather events, and we see forest fires as a result of that, which might destroy an entire forest ecosystem. So that forest ecosystem is therefore, we experience a huge amount of biodiversity loss, and it's that forest ecosystem is therefore no longer able to deliver on ecosystem services such as carbon sequestration, such as flood management, such as temperature control. So we have lost a huge amount of value from losing that forest ecosystem as a result of increased temperatures. So you'll see how those things, so it no longer is available to absorb carbon, which compounds the climate situation. If we look at land use, it's about how we're using your land. It's in the technical documents, it's called ecosystem conversion. So how are we changing the use of our land and then managing that use, the land and our seas, so the marine environment as well. The pollution, so how much pollution are we generating? And so that's really connected to your waste streams, solid, liquid, gaseous pollution, how much of that is going into landfill. Invasive species, if you have a huge land bank, managing invasive species is important, or if you're involved in the logistics sectors, are you contributing to the movement or proliferation of invasive species? And then the exploitation or over-exploitation of natural resources as well. So things like overfishing or foresting, cutting down trees in an unmanaged way. So a typical business, if you look at this typical business, has impacts on nature, and the typical impacts on nature would be emissions. So obviously the contribution to climate change there, but also deterioration in air quality, which affects every species in the biosphere, including ourselves. the generation of waste. So again, the multiple waste streams that we're looking at, how much of that is going to landfill, how much of it is being managed appropriately, and is all of it being managed? How we're using our land. So if what our land footprint is like, how big is it? How much do we have rain gardens for managing water? Are we using pesticides? What other chemicals might be going into the soil or the groundwater? Indeed, how much water are we using as an organization? And what is the impact that has on biodiversity and or the social impact of water use? And lastly, there are disturbances, noise and light, which also affect all of the species within the biosphere, especially humans. So let's look at dependencies on nature. And this is a photograph that I used for the last few cycles of doing this deck of Middleton from last year. And I think I could replace it this year with a picture of Bantry, because Bantry, County Cork, in the last week or so has experienced catastrophic flooding events as well. So, this is an ongoing issue for people living in Ireland. Part of the reason why these stream flooding events happen is climate change and all the extra, because of the warming planet, all the extra moisture in the air, and we have more extreme rain-related events, but also because of the way the land around these areas has been managed. So we have stripped back a lot of those of nature's infrastructure that traditionally would have managed or at least reduced the severity of events like this. So that means when we have interfered with floodplains, or we have built concrete walls around rivers where the water just doesn't have anywhere to go, and it really compounds the problem. But more, it's taking away vegetation that would otherwise be able to absorb and stop the flow of water. So this is what we're now seeing. We're seeing this double effect of having eliminated that natural infrastructure that would have supported a community like this, coupled with the extreme weather events that we're seeing with climate change. So moving on to the ecosystem services, so this lovely radial dial on the right, we have ecosystem services that have been divided into 4 different sections. So we have the provisioning section, where we're getting food and raw materials and fresh water. We have the air quality piece from the regulating services, and we have the supporting services, nutrient cycling, and the cultural side of things as well. So the cultural side of things is often it's often overlooked in terms of the intrinsic value of nature. And the problem with that is, we have a huge dependency on, from the point of view of our mental and physical well-being. Being out in nature is proven to be good for us. And in fact, the opposite of that is true in terms of when we don't get to spend time in nature, it has a negative effect on us. So there's also, recreation and ecotourism associated with that, the benefits we get of being in an aesthetically beautiful place, and also, of course, the spiritual and religious values that we experience when we're out in nature as well. So typical business, again, the dependencies on nature. Energy comes from a natural system. Even if it's fossil fuels, it's still part of a natural system. Pollination, some businesses are very dependent on. Whether or not it's down within your value chain. If you're in the hotel business, for example, you have a certain dependency on pollinators to provide the food for your restaurant. How much land, so your requirement for land, how much land do you require for your business? Some businesses require more land, like data centers and things like that. You may require a footprint within the sea if you're in a marine related industry. Your requirement to have stable soils and healthy soils, again, maybe sitting in your value chain. Your requirement for water and protection from extreme weather events like storms and floods, and a reliance on having good, nice spaces to use for recreation. So what's the ask here for business? What are we telling businesses, suggesting to businesses to do? Well, the core part of our offering is around the Act D framework. So this is basically a really interesting graphic that was sort of developed by a lot of different NGO stakeholders that did an assessment across all of the different methodologies and frameworks that exist for nature assessment, and sort of came to the conclusion that they all kind of follow the same logic. And this logic is around assessment, commitment, and transformation, all the while we're disclosing. And obviously, if you're subject to CSRD, you will be mandated to disclose and report. But if you're an SME here, you can also voluntarily disclose, voluntarily assess, and have a look at that stuff so that you're building a resilient business model. And even though it's not mandated. So when we're looking at assessment, we're talking about businesses needing to know their impacts and dependencies so that they can develop a credible nature strategy. So it's measuring, valuing, and prioritizing your impacts and dependencies so that you're acting on the most material ones. So that really feeds into the materiality assessment, or double materiality. The second part is committing. So it's about that credible nature strategy that has clear objectives. So that's science-based targets that will put your company on the right track towards operating within planetary boundaries. The transformation piece is about the avoidance and reducing negative impacts, restoring and regenerating nature where you can, tipping your business model towards nature positive, and if you can, advocating for an enabling policy environment for business so that we are facilitated and enabled to do the right thing. So there's an evolution of your business model. And this kind of approach, and CSRD and all of those things that exist now to confuse us, they're really, like, CSRD is not a stick to beat business with. It is a tool for businesses to use to build more resilient business models, more responsible business models. So it's about future-proofing your business and setting good foundations for a future for your business. So this is really how we should view CSRD and TNFD and any of those other frameworks that exist. It's about building business better. So how do you do this? How can you be supported in doing this? This is where the Business for Biodiversity Ireland platform comes in. It is a government-funded initiative created in response to a growing need for businesses to get support on this. So we are working and collaborating across several different programs, and we are working with some international NGOs as well, so that we can bring these relatively new concepts. We can bring that knowledge here to Ireland and implement it and support businesses in navigating through all these different frameworks. So we have developed a 4-track training program in association with Business for Nature. And if you haven't come across them, I'd recommend looking at their website, businessfornature.org. They're at the frontier of this work, the Business Nature Nexus. We are designing this program to support businesses in creating and implementing this credible nature strategy. And we want to help businesses understand how to integrate nature into decision-making, how to build a resilient business model, and whilst also complying with your reporting obligations, but ultimately delivering broader systemic value as a business. So the Nature Strategy Accelerator Programme, it's really important for me to sort of elucidate that it's aligned with all of the existing frameworks that are out there. So we're just bringing those together and helping to implement. So it's aligned with the World Business Council for Sustainable Development's Roadmaps to Nature Positive, Business for Nature's Nature Strategy Handbook, and the TNFD LEAP approach. Now, all of those things are also interoperable. So there's a lot of stuff coming out, but ultimately the logic is the same, the concepts are the same. And this is just us providing a vehicle in order for businesses to move through the different aspects of these different processes. So the discovery track, we launched the platform back in January, and we had a huge amount of interest. We wanted to make a track available to businesses that you just have to register for, but it doesn't require any financial input. So we created a discovery track, which is really focused on helping you as an organization understand your connection to nature and deepen your understanding of the biodiversity crisis and how it relates to you and your business. And this is really for businesses that want to take action, that are beginning to understand that biodiversity is important, but they're not really sure why, and they don't really know where to start. So the discovery track, as I said, it's free to engage with. It'll help you to improve your knowledge in biodiversity. It'll help you to understand what are the next steps for my business. It'll also connect you with a community of other businesses that are also going in the same direction as you are, that are at the same stage in their journey as you are, which can be really powerful in terms of being part of a community, because sometimes it can be quite lonely and isolating in a sustainability team. And it's really great to have access to other people, maybe to have a chat about what you're doing, or maybe a little vent about how difficult it all is, or sharing ideas, sharing knowledge, sharing learnings. And that's really, really important when it comes to progressing on this nature journey. So if you join the discovery track, you'll get some guidance on how to get started. We'll do thematic webinars based on biodiversity learning throughout the year. Excuse me. And you'll have access to curated resources from around from various different organizations that will help you progress on your journey. And this will include sector-specific guidance, topic standards. You know, they're all available online, but we've just curated them and put them in one place for you. So the action track, so the fees kick into the action track. I think Kathleen's going to talk a little bit more about how Enterprise Ireland might be able to support some of their client businesses. The action track is about businesses who realize and understand that nature is a priority and are ready to make a commitment and start the assessment, start undertaking their double materiality assessment. So you obviously get access to all the other free stuff from the discovery track, but we'll be offering 3 online assessment focused workshops per year, but also one-on-one consultations with the team here on the platform focused on specific business challenges. And how this creates value is that it offers you support in completing your double materiality assessment. It offers you support in assessing your impacts and dependencies and looking at nature-related risks and opportunities. So if you know that this is something that you need to do, you're committed to it, and you're ready to start the assessment, then the action track is the one to aim for. Once you've completed your double materiality assessment and you're ready to define your nature ambition statement and create your credible nature strategy, you will progress or level up onto the strategy track. And again, we are providing written guidance for businesses so that you can move at your own pace, but we're also doing strategy focused workshops. And to date, these have all been online, in person, the strategy ones. So it's, and they can be maybe 5 hours long, but in person, and really, really valuable in terms of learning from other organizations and networking and mentoring. It's a really important part. I think something you just don't quite get online. Also offering those one-on-one consultations with individual businesses to help you with your specific challenges. So this will help you and support you in defining what your nature ambition statement is going to look like. How do you align your different strategies? If you have social strategies or climate strategies, how can you align all these strategies? I mean, it's really a point to note that a nature strategy or biodiversity action, it's not an additional thing to do. It is a core path that will help your organization deliver on climate and nature objectives. So it shouldn't be viewed as a tangential track or a side track. It should be embedded into your sustainability strategy. We talk about credible nature strategies, but actually what we're trying to achieve is a nature positive sustainability strategy. So nature is at the core, and you'll see examples of this now momentarily. So the output of the strategy track is to create that credible nature strategy. And then finally, the evolution track is about implementation. So we will support you in creating an implementation plan that will help you to measure, monitor, and evaluate your actions. We have access to a huge network of experts on this so that we can bring people in to help support you if we don't have the knowledge in-house in terms of measuring and monitoring. This is for businesses who have already issued a nature strategy, and a similar level of support is offered in terms of guidance, online workshops, or possibly in-person workshops and consultations with the team. So I just wanted to finish off with a couple of examples from industry, and these examples have come from the Now for Nature campaign. So nowfornature.org, it's an initiative of Business for Nature. They are supporting our Nature Strategy Accelerator program. And these are examples of nature strategies that have been uploaded, which is a service that they're offering. You can create your strategy, you can upload it onto nowfornature.org. They will review it for you and offer you some guidance in terms of making it better, or they will say, yes, this is a good strategy and it meets the minimum criteria to be a credible strategy. So there's a few organizations up there that have released credible nature strategies. Tetra Pak is one of them. It's an incredibly good example of a nature positive sustainability strategy. And here's some examples of their nature targets. So you see 2025 is a big year for them next year. So they want all of their supply base will have nature impact assessments done in relation to procurement requirements. And they're looking for 100% of the raw materials with the most significant land footprint will come from certified sources. And in 2025, they will use geographic information to verify deforestation-free status of their paperboard and other products within their packaging. So you can go and have a look at their very detailed nature strategy, and there's a lot of similar kinds of objectives within that. So that's Tetra Pak. Then we have move into the pharmaceuticals industry. We have GSK here. So this is their examples of their nature targets. So they want 100% of their sites to achieve good water stewardship by 25 and reduce their overall water use. So again, we've sort of divorced water from biodiversity, but they're totally connected. A water target is a biodiversity target. In terms of land, they're looking to have a positive impact on biodiversity on all sites by 2030, and oceans, they're looking for 100% of marine derived materials sustainably sourced by 2030. So some examples there from GSK. And I'll finish with Decathlon. And so their biodiversity targets are, so they're looking to assess and disclose their impacts and dependencies on biodiversity. They've set that as a target for themselves, organizing pilot projects in India to encourage the reduction of negative impacts from local activities. And they've got a couple of other biodiversity initiatives centered around their different retail sites around France. So you can see the variety of different types of targets, but businesses are starting to make those now, and we'll start seeing the impact of those over the coming years. So in terms of key takeaways, I would just want to leave these few poignant remarks with you to take home with you. The first one is that nature needs to have a seat in the boardroom. Nature needs to have a voice. And this is something that businesses should be thinking about now, is incorporating nature into those decision-making processes throughout the business. And we need to start looking at nature and sustainability, all of those topics, as a machine within, a cog within the business machine, in the same way that we view health and safety. That's embedded throughout the whole organization. Quality is embedded throughout the whole organization. Sustainability and nature protection should be integrated into decision making in the same way that those two other functions are. If your organization is big enough, you should think about a strategic nature team, or at least one or two people working on this. This is not a bolt-on role. This is a very in-depth role that requires multiple types of different skills, a varied skill set, but also needs to glean support from existing skills that might exist within the business, like somebody who has skills in data management and analytics, in change management and risk. All of those different skills must be brought together to support a nature team or someone within your sustainability team that's focused on nature. And I suppose to finish off, nature is everyone's business. We all depend on it, whether we're a business or an individual, we all depend on it. Nature and biodiversity issues should be well understood throughout the whole organization. Our National Biodiversity Action Plan from January talks about whole of government, whole of society approach to nature, and we need to extend this to whole of business. The responsibility for sustainability or nature action should not lie solely on the shoulders of your sustainability team. It should be about everybody. And I'll finish it there.
Thank you, Lucy. I'll just share my slides again here now, just 2 seconds. That was great. See if we're showing. So we have time now for questions. And I see we have, let's see, I seem to have lost the chat there. But if anyone has, sorry, no, I just can't see the chat.
I can see it there, Kathleen. There's just one question about, isn't nature positive more than reducing your impact? And I would say yes, absolutely. It's the kind of dual approach of reduce your impact, but also mobilize resources towards nature protection and stewardship and replenishment of natural capital. So it's a bit like, a lot of companies are busy tree planting or doing these big biodiversity gestures in their car park or putting beehives on the roof, but they're not fundamentally addressing how they're pressurizing those drivers of biodiversity loss. So if you're destroying nature somewhere else through your direct operations or your value chain, and then you're planting a load of trees over there, that's not nature positive. We need to be able to address the causes of ecological degradation in the first instance, as per the mitigation hierarchy. And I would suggest looking at the science-based targets to get a visual on that. But it's like a food pyramid. At the very bottom, where the food and veg section is, it's all about avoidance of harm in the first place. And then as you work your way through the top to the chocolate part of the food pyramid, that's where the restoration and rewilding and tree planting piece comes in. But there's a whole host of other steps that businesses need to take before you get there.
That's great. We have another question there. Is there a preferred software tool that businesses can use to store this data in a guided manner?
There isn't a preferred software tool, but there's lots of different software options that are sort of mushrooming up, I want to say, to help you manage CSRD data. But I wouldn't be able to, there isn't a preferred one. I think there's lots of options out there.
We have another question coming in there, Lucy. So getting the whole company on board is a challenge with some organizations. The higher ups don't always see the bottom line value. Any tips on convincing them of the urgency of this?
Well, I mean, you have to kind of get into psychology here a little bit. And unless you have a CEO that is really passionate about this, it's going to be very hard to break down the mindset. But I guess if you're going to approach it from the risk perspective. So understand fully what biodiversity loss represents as a risk to the business and approach from that perspective. Because risk will also, people have a bigger fear of loss than they have the joy of gaining something. They have a much bigger, those two things don't equate. So we're always much more worried about losing something. So I would approach it from the risk perspective and do your research on that. There's an awful lot of information out there about the sector context. So if you're working in the built environment, or if you're working in pharmaceuticals, there's quite a lot of information out there about the potential risks that are posed to those industries by declining biodiversity. So that would be my advice is to approach it from the risk perspective.
Thanks, Lucy. So the next question is actually just in relation to Enterprise Ireland supports in terms of company size. So I suppose Enterprise Ireland supports typically or will support Irish owned businesses that are exporting or have the potential to export. And we also work with the foreign direct investment food and drink companies. So it's a wide range of companies and across a range of sectors. So Enterprise Ireland clients typically will have a development advisor. So if you're not an Enterprise Ireland client company and you're exporting your manufacturing and or internationally traded services, you can reach out then to see about potentially become a client. If you go onto the Enterprise Ireland website, you can see a link then to inquire about becoming a client. So I'll talk to the supports in a few minutes, but I suppose as outlined by Lucy there, developing your biodiversity strategy, your action plan, building your internal capabilities and being able to identify how you're dependent on nature and your impacts on nature, all of that can be supported under the green support. So we have a range of supports from training and advisory supports to capital and R&D supports. So we would see developing your biodiversity action plan as eligible under that, and so you're not alone. There's experts in this area, and Lucy has given us a fantastic overview there. So I suppose a call to action is to check out the Business for Biodiversity platform, and I really like the examples, Lucy, you gave there as well from the Now for Nature organization. So that'd be another one to look, and you can see the examples of what other companies are doing, leading in this space. So look, we'll just go to the next question there, and I'll touch on the supports then again in a minute. So what challenges do companies face in implementing biodiversity initiatives, and how can they be overcome?
I guess the biggest challenge that most organizations are facing is the availability of data. And I guess a lot of people will use that as an excuse not to take action. But the reality is that the transparency along the value chain is not great yet. And so it can be very difficult for you to understand if you're in, a hotel business and you're trying to figure out where does your furniture come from, and you're trying to chase that whole value chain to figure out where does the wood come from. We don't have a great degree of transparency yet in value chains, but it's starting to happen. So that's probably by far the biggest challenge. So there's that side of the data, and then we also need data if we're wanting to invest time or resources in a conservation project or increasing biodiversity, like biodiversity net gain, for example, on site. If we have a large land footprint, sometimes it can be very hard to gather that granular data that we need, or the right type of data that will help us to measure what a net gain looks like in biodiversity. So, but there's a huge amount of work happening in that perspective. There's a lot of AI technology that's been leveraged for this kind of work as well, particularly around measurement of biodiversity uplift. So they for me are the challenges that keep coming up time and time again. If you want to go into the more at the business level, I think one of the challenges is that sustainability teams often aren't resourced well enough, and the greatest proportion of their time is spent on compliance work and reporting, taking people away from the real work of sustainability, which is about creativity, innovation, and troubleshooting and problem solving, and all of those lovely words, which is what I'd imagine that most sustainability people get into this space for, is to try and create a better business, but you're often pulled away from the real work of sustainability by the reporting mandates and gathering metrics and all the rest of it. So yes, we need that, but we need a balance of people also being given space to do some of the problem solving work as well. So that can be a challenge.
That's great. Thanks, Lucy. And there was another question then. I think you've covered it off there, I suppose, in relation to the challenges and in relation to the supply chain. And have you any further tips to add to that?
I mean, I would just say, if you're interested in this space, to follow us on social media. We're on LinkedIn, and we do have an upcoming webinar in November, and we're still finalizing the theme of that, but it will be very relevant. It'll be high level and relevant to any and every business. Yeah, I think just to keep your eyes open on what's happening. It's a rapidly changing space, and we are the one-stop shop for all biodiversity support in Ireland. So do come to us if you're looking for specific supports.
That's great. We're getting quite a few thank yous. But just I think maybe one last question. What are the best options from a tech perspective? I know you said there are multiples, but are there leading lights here, and what functionality are they focusing
on? I mean, I don't know about if there's any leading lights. I've heard of a few of these companies that are providing this kind of thing. And if you want one that I've heard of is the Future Planet one. So if you want to have, that's an Irish company, and I think they're based here in Cork, and they are doing quite a lot of work on the software side of things and the tech side. So if you want to check those out. They tend to be focusing on really just all the data points, all the thousands of data points that are required to comply with CSRD reporting. So it's really about managing data points, and that seems to be the focus. So taking the manual labor out of that and just automating it, really.
Great. Thanks a million, Lucy, for that. So I think, look, that's all the questions answered there now at the moment. So I'm just going to share a few slides before we finish up. And as just, I suppose, a reminder of the supports that are available from Enterprise Ireland. So we have the Sustainability Kickstarter workshop, and on this slide, you'll see the upcoming dates. So we've been running these more or less every 2 weeks for most of the year, with the exception of during the summer months. So if you're at the early stages of developing your sustainability strategy, this is an initial workshop to engage SMEs. Is really focused on, I suppose, to develop an initial sustainability action plan. But up to 2 people from a company can attend, and the registration links are on our website. We also have the Sustainability Leadership Programme. This is open to Enterprise Ireland client companies. Up to 2 people can attend again. So we've one more cohort of companies beginning a programme this year. It's starting on the 22nd of October. Spaces are limited, so I'd really encourage you to check this out, and we're providing the link here as well to register. So it's a workshop every 2 weeks for 12 weeks. So it'll be 6 workshops in total to develop your sustainability strategy. And this will be a charter that will be developed and can be shared with your senior leadership team and shared with other participants on the course. So just, I suppose, in terms of the range of supports, and as I said, we do have a range of supports from, depending on where a company is on their sustainability journey. And at the initial stages, we have the webinars, they're recorded, they're available to watch back on our website, the Sustainability Kickstarter workshop and the leadership programme. But then we have our one-to-one grant supports from the Climate Action Voucher, which is a 2-day fully funded support, to the Green Star, Green Plus, and strategic consultancy. So as we mentioned already, developing your biodiversity action plan, building those internal capabilities can be supported under those supports with consultancy advice or with training. We've obviously capital supports then to help companies, whether it's to install meters, to decarbonise manufacturing, processes and move away from fossil fuel. And we have a range of RD&I supports. So look, if you're an Enterprise Ireland client, or if you're with the local enterprise office or Ross or IDA, reach out to your relevant development advisor. So our webinar next week, which is our final webinar for this year, is on how to carry out a materiality assessment. So this will obviously be really of interest to companies that are in scope of CSRD, but also for companies that are looking at the CSRD, the ESRS standards, because these are seen as best practice globally, and the guidance that's there for carrying out a materiality assessment. So this will be of interest to SMEs that are looking at kind of best practice in terms of how to carry out this materiality assessment, because by carrying out a really good materiality assessment is going to really lay the foundations for a really strong sustainability strategy. The other webinars that we've hosted this year and last year as well are all available to watch back on the Enterprise Ireland website. And just to flag as well, I suppose, as a call to action, I suppose, for attendees today, that the Business for Biodiversity Ireland are carrying out this survey in partnership with the National Parks and Wildlife Service. So it's to gain insights into the biodiversity skills that are required to run a sustainable business in Ireland. So we'll provide the link in an email afterwards. So I'd encourage you, if you can, just take a few minutes just to fill out this form. It should be filled out by someone within the business who has the most understanding, I suppose, of the business relationship to biodiversity or sustainability. So I think a call of action could be to complete the survey, and also then just to check out the first discovery track. If this is, if you're at really early stages and thinking about biodiversity, to look at that discovery track and to register for same. Or if it supports that Enterprise Ireland potentially can provide, reach out to myself or Ankush on green@enterprise-ireland.com, or reach out to your development advisor for more supports there. So look, I'd just like to thank everyone for joining us today and for registering for the event. But I suppose I'd most like to thank Lucy. Thanks very much, Lucy. You've shared a lot of information there, a lot of really useful insights and links. So look, thanks very much.
Thank you too.